Okay, it looks like everybody has joined, so I want to welcome you to another AlphaStaff webinar. Today's topic is unemployment claims management. And before we get started, I just want to touch on a couple of housekeeping messages for you. We are recording today's webinar, and you will be able to find it on our website under Client Resources in about a week to 10 days. Also, we do have a chat feature. We ask that you put your questions there during the presentation, and then at the end we will open it up for your questions. Also, if you are attending the live webinar today, you are eligible to receive 1 credit by both organizations in the world of HR. That is the Society for Human Resource Management and HRCI. At the end, I'll give you an email address and phone number that you can reach out to get those. For now, I would like to introduce our presenter, Pam Nading. She is our Senior Unemployment Claims Consultant. And if you've been in any of her presentations, you know that you're in for a wealth of information today. So be sure to take notes and ask questions. Pam has specialized over the years in unemployment claims as well as SUTA tax management, and she's done 2 decades. I find that hard to believe knowing she's only about 20, but that's okay. She's been with AlphaStaff since 2008, managing unemployment claims and helping with hearings, and she is a rock star where both of those are concerned. If you've had experience in those cases, you know that for a fact. Previously, Pam was an HR generalist manager, and she brings with her 15 years of human capital experience as well. So you are in great hands. And without further ado, here's Pam.
Thank you, Sandy, and welcome everyone. I'm always pleased to have the opportunity to meet with our fantastic clients and share some of what we do on a daily basis, because it's all about the evidence and it's all about what you do when working with us that makes the difference in controlling unemployment claims. Today, some of the things that we'd like to touch on is a general overview of unemployment compensation and how it's financed. What entitles a person to benefits, as well as what would deny someone or disqualify them. Employer compliance issues, which we are all subject to. Some of the critical documents, and I said up front, and I'll probably say it frequently during this webinar, it really is all about the evidence. Our recommendations for best practices, how we work together in our mutual roles, and then an opportunity for you to ask questions. So, what is unemployment? It's been around forever. Congress enacted the Social Security Act in 1935. It's a federally mandated program that is administered individually by each state, which means that each state is allowed to have its own individual laws, qualifying conditions, weekly benefit amounts, denying or disqualifying provisions, their own tax structure, and the only requirement is that they meet certain federal guidelines. How is unemployment financed? In most states, it's financed by the employer, which frequently is a misunderstanding on the part of former employees or employees that are working for you. Many times they believe that it's something that they pay for through their taxes, but with the exception of very few states, approximately 3, the employer pays solely for the amount of unemployment benefits that are paid out, and that is done through a tax. That tax is either charged directly to the employer through claims that are lost, or indirectly all employers pay for claims that are charged to the state's unemployment trust fund. The rate of tax that an employer pays is based on the unemployment claims that they lose, the size of their payroll as well as its fluctuation, and the overall health of that particular state. We're doing great right now as a country in unemployment. Just this morning, they were touting again that our unemployment tax rate nationally is at 3.7, almost a 50-year low. Last year, it was at 3.8, so we are still slowly moving in the right direction. Another good thing about that is that we're also seeing great report. The unemployment rate continues to go down. How do these two things translate to your business? Well, it can happen and affect an employer in two ways. In some states, the rate an employer pays is similar to a checking account. The cost of unemployment claims lost is subtracted from the dollars that an employer pays in on a quarterly basis. The lower your account balance goes as a result of lost unemployment claims, the higher your rate will go. By the same token, employers that are in growth mode can also see an increase in their unemployment tax rate. And this is sometimes something that employers look at and they say, well, why am I seeing an increase in my rate? The reason is because, let's say you're growing. Now, we just talked about the fact that unemployment's at an all-time low, workforce saturation is at a higher rate. So employers frequently are in what we would look at now as a growth mode. Payroll is increasing, contributions are increasing, and the employer has been paying at a lower rate of tax. The state always compares the amount of your account balance to the size of your payroll. So if your account balance begins to look low as a result of driving higher payroll costs because of higher workforce, then you may see an increase in your rate. And typically that's how it works. Your rate is driven by both the size of your payroll. If it increases, you may see an increase in your rate, and lost unemployment claims. If they increase, that can affect you in the same way. I list here also that rates are usually impacted based on the claims that an employer has had over the last 3 years. Matter of fact, just yesterday I was speaking with a client. We were working on a claim from early 2018. I called the client seeking information. This case was actually going to a hearing. Now, going to a hearing in July 2019 on an individual that separated in June of 2018. In this particular case, again, all about the evidence, we determined that we were unable to support the case any longer because the person that had worked the case no longer had the evidence. And so it's really important that we keep track of all of that. An unemployment claim stays with you for a long time. So what are some of the eligibility conditions? What are the type of things that would entitle a person to unemployment benefits? In order to be determined eligible, a person has to first be unemployed or partially unemployed, able to work, available for work, actively seeking suitable work, have sufficient prior earnings to qualify, which essentially for the minimum is very, very low, few hundred dollars almost, and have separated from the last employer for a work-related reason considered beyond their control, or for a non-work-related reason considered by that particular state as good cause. And I'll talk just a little bit about both of those. But let me first share that we are not in the business of preventing people who are genuinely entitled to unemployment benefits from collecting. It's always our goal to manage our claims costs accurately and fairly and as promptly as we can. If your employee is laid off due to lack of work, we're going to respond to that claim as quick as possible, send in the information so as not to in any way impact that unfortunately separated individual. By the same token, there are sometimes cases where individuals may resign. They separate for reasons that the state looks at and says, well, gee, another reasonable person, the reasonable man rule, would separate for the same condition. Therefore, we view that as good cause, even though it's not connected with the work. And depending on the state, because they're all different, they all get to make up their own rules, the employer may or may not be charged for those. And we'll speak about the specific reasons in just a few minutes. What are some of the reasons that would deny a person unemployment benefits? Generally, they fit into two categories. Individuals who resign without good work-connected cause, or discharges for work-connected misconduct. Misconduct is generally identified as any willful, wanton, deliberate act that's in disregard of the standard of behavior that an employer has the right to expect. Willful, meaning they thought about it and did it anyway. negligent, meaning that they did it so often that they are now considered culpable or responsible for those actions, i.e. not isolated. Did it cause harm to the employer? Another very important key in determining if it's misconduct, and always, it's about the evidence. In cases where the employer is the moving party, and in the case of a discharge, we are the moving party, the burden of proof is on the employer. The claimant is absolutely innocent until we prove our case. To be truthful, the burden is almost always on the employer, regardless of the reason for separation, even in cases involving voluntary separations. All the claimant has to do, or former employee needs to say, is that that's not true. I was discharged. They said this at the time I was separated. Or I had no choice. They told me I had to sign and, I didn't fight with them. I just left. Anytime, whatever the claimant says, it then shifts the burden back to the employer. So to be truthful, because it is always about the evidence, the burden of proof is usually considered on the employer to prove their case. When an individual, however, is denied benefits, depending on the state, Florida 17 times, and in some states much less, the individual is disqualified until they re-enter the labor market, earn anywhere from 4 to 17 times the weekly benefit amount, and then separate due to a non-disqualifying reason. So they're back out there based on what we were just talking about in the eligibility conditions, where they separated due to some reason beyond their control that would entitle them to benefits. This is a good chart for you. What's the difference between poor performance and misconduct? The state looks at these two in a very separate and distinct way, and we have to prove it. If it's poor performance that the employer felt the claimant could control, then the claim should be protestable, but we have to prove it. So what's the difference between the two? In the case of poor performance, you usually have someone that simply cannot perform the duties. In a case of misconduct, for example, they will not perform the duties. In a case of poor performance, we're looking at a separation due to genuine incompetence, where the person simply tried their best and was unable to meet the minimum standard of performance. Their failure to adequately perform is not based on any willful, deliberate, or active neglect on the part of the employee, but rather due to a lack of ability. In the case of misconduct, however, we're looking at a completely almost opposite scenario. The individual won't do the job. The claimant is not working to the best of their ability. The failure to adequately meet the employer's job standard is due to willful action or acts of repeated negligence on their part, and the claimant is fully aware of the consequence of the action. So what are some examples of both? In the case of poor performance, and I'm going to mention this quickly because we do have quite a few Florida clients on the phone today. Florida provides the employer with a 90-day probation period. At the time of hire, all of your employees through AlphaStaff we communicate that the first 90 days are considered probationary. But in order for the employer to take advantage of that, they have to be communicating with the employee on an ongoing basis throughout those first 90 days, letting them know how they're doing. If they're not meeting the standard, then what has the employer done to help them? If they're still not meeting the standard, have you communicated that their job is on the line? And when you separate that employment, if that's ultimately the decision that you meet, and we encourage you to make those decisions quickly if you feel that this person is simply not a good fit, then did you communicate in truth why you're letting them go? Jane or Joe, we've met with you. I'm sorry, we've decided that today's going to be your last day. Simply have not met the minimum performance standard that we were hoping for in the position. We absolutely wish you the best in your next employment opportunity. We know that you gave this your very best effort, but we've decided that today's going to be your last day. It's important that you're communicating throughout that process with the employee, and even more important at the time that you separate, that you're honest and very accurate about why you're letting them go, that it's due to poor performance. In cases like that, the employer is granted relief from charge, but let me stress, this is Florida only, and let me also stress that if you're not following those steps, Florida no longer grants relief from charge to those claims. They're much more in control and scrutinized much more so than ever before. In the case of work-connected misconduct, you have an individual that, will not do the job. Now, maybe they're not doing the job because they get to work late frequently. How do we prove that it was misconduct instead of poor performance? One of the things we look for, especially listed here under the scenario of misconduct, is that the individual has not worked to the best of their ability. They have to prove that on the job. When you're working for an employer, you need to be able to say as the employer that this person came to work and performed successfully in this position for a reasonable period of time, and then for reasons that the employer can identify, hopefully, their work began to deteriorate. They're coming to work late, or they're no longer focused on their job, or perhaps it's personal issues that are distracting them from the work. But you need to be able to prove that they did a great job back here, and that here is their performance appraisal, and here are some emails that they received where we complimented them on the work that they did, or our customers complimented them on the work that they did, or here are the ratings that we had in metrics that we track within the company that identify that this person was doing a great job, and now they haven't. And we've communicated that they haven't, and we've talked to them about bringing their work back up, and yet we're still not seeing the performance that we need. They've advised us that they don't need any further training. They know the job, but it's just not getting it done. That may be an act of misconduct. We'll work with you very closely to identify those behaviors that cause this person's work to deteriorate, and where at all possible, identify it as misconduct if it genuinely is the case. But that's what the state's looking for in comparing poor performance to work-related misconduct. So what is employer compliance? One of the things I'd like to say when we reach this section is that this year, AlphaStaff was acknowledged by the National Association of State Workforce Agencies for their dedication to reducing fraud and waste in the unemployment claims system. AlphaStaff responds to most of their claims through what is known as SIDES, the State Information Data Exchange. It's a web-based program that allows us to transmit very securely from state to employer our confidential claim responses in a way that provides that information to the state accurately, quickly. It cuts down on waste on both parts. There's no longer snail mail, and it avoids that waste in the system. AlphaStaff this year was recognized for its outstanding performance. And touted a little bit further, I'll say we were the only employer leasing company, the only professional employer organization acknowledged this year. So what if you want someone to collect? How do you do that? And does the state like that? And how does that work? Well, the state requires that if an individual separated voluntarily without good cause, that they should be denied benefits. And the state requires that if an individual is discharged due to work-connected misconduct, that they should be denied benefits. So what you communicate to that employee at the time that they're separating is what's key to determining whether or not an individual is entitled to unemployment benefits. The state isn't looking to make this a form of welfare. It is identified as an immediate program to provide temporary relief to individuals who are unemployed due to no fault of their own. But it's extremely critical that if you've identified someone who is separating due to poor performance, that's what's being communicated to them at the time of separation. What that employee writes down on the claim when they file is just as important as what we write down on the claim form based on what you share with us. And the two need to meet. The employer can actually be penalized, charged for additional claims if we respond to a claim with inaccurate information, or if we fail to provide the state with sufficient information to allow them to accurately adjudicate a case. So for example, let's say your employee goes down and advises the state that he was fired because he kept coming to work late. But there's more to it. And the employer has determined at this time that for reasons that make perfect sense, that you are not going to keep this person on, and maybe you would like them to collect unemployment, which is not what the program is designed for. Again, let me stress that what you tell the employee needs to be consistent with what we are also stating on the unemployment claim form. How we respond determines both. So what are some of the critical documents that we recommend you use through best practices? Fortunately, if you're utilizing Smart Start and AlphaSource, most of those are now at your fingertips. We're going to talk about some of those, and I've included in this webinar, while we may not go into extreme detail on how do you find the forms, it's in the webinar. So if you download it, just if we don't make it through everything today, you do know that you have it available. And so far, we're doing great on time, so there's no reason why we can't get to it. These are some of the documents that we recommend in supporting your position. The employee handbook acknowledgement, and again, if you're using Smart Start, when we receive an unemployment claim, we're going to take some of the time that we might have asked in the past that you do in providing us with the necessary documents, because again, it's all about the evidence, right? We will log into Smart Start. We will retrieve that employee's handbook acknowledgement. So we'll look in the payroll system at why they separated from the company and provide automatically that beginning baseline picture of why this person separated. And then based on any additional information that you've provided, maybe the notice of employee separation form, which by the way, if you're filling that out online through AlphaSource, a copy now automatically gets sent to the unemployment claims department. We will look and see if we've got one. So now we've got the employee handbook acknowledgement. We've got the notice of employee separation form, which is coming in direct to us. Two mouses on my desk, sorry, I'm grabbing the wrong one. The notice of employee separation form, which is also here and available. And we're able to really start putting that information together. We know dates of employment, rate of pay, reason for separation, and then we'll reach out to you with a personalized request regarding the information that we may need. What are some of the documents that really make up and help us build a successful case for you? Yes, the employee handbook acknowledgement. Yes, the employee handbook, which by the way, if they're doing the acknowledgement online, we have your handbook too, and we're able to look at that. The employee disciplinary action form. If this is a case of misconduct, then we're going to look at any corrective counseling. We may not have that, however, on file unless you sent it in, and that would be something that we would write to you and request that you provide us. Any witness statements based on the separation, the employee attendance. Now, you may be keeping that through an Excel format, through the 2019 employee attendance calendar, or you may have your own form of documenting that. You may be using your attendance tracking system to document why people are late to work. What's important in that area is that you are keeping track of the attendance, why they were late, what excuse they provided, and very, very important that you're also communicating back to the employee if it's an attendance issue that it's unexcused. It's not a good idea to say or to be in a position where you say, well, they knew it was unexcused because I talked to them last time. No, you need to let them know that it's still an ongoing problem. It will result in further disciplinary action if they don't get to work on time, and that the excuse they provided you today, i.e., hey, I'm stuck on I-95 again, is not a good excuse. They need to plan for the time necessary to get to work. Performance appraisal is also a very helpful document. You do have one in AlphaSource. Resignation statement. as well as an exit interview form. And the exit interview form actually is very helpful. I used one in an unemployment hearing just last week where the individual indicated that they resigned. When they applied for unemployment benefits, indicated that they resigned, but the employer was unfair and that the supervisor was unfair. But then they met with the supervisor at the time of the exit interview and said that they were very happy with the company. They worked out their notice and they separated. Again, it's all about the evidence, and having documentation that supports your position will either win or lose your case. And there's nothing more frustrating to an employer than to have an expensive unemployment claim lost, not because you weren't justified in letting the individual go through dismissal, but because there simply wasn't enough evidence. This is the employee disciplinary action form. This form is available through AlphaSource, and I'll show you where it's located. What's important, what's key with this is that it is signed by the employee, that it is signed by a manager, that a witness is present at the time that it's administered. These names should be legible, and if the signature is not legible, please print who signed the document, the date it was signed. You've got the employee's name, the date administered, general information about the individual. What is this? Is this the verbal warning for an infraction, a written warning for a similar infraction, a final warning for a similar infraction, or is it termination? It's important that it's documented. Why are you issuing this? Is it for attendance, conduct, quality of work, insubordination, utilization of time, for performance or performance? Again, you know, when you see this, think about poor performance. The poor performance is a category that is not protestable. So if you're identifying this individual as being responsible for the behavior and leaning more toward the behavior being deliberate and willful, then make sure that you're classifying this as conduct. You can check off performance too, but otherwise the state sees this and says, oh, see, you thought the person was a weak performer back then and not qualified. Work quality is another good example of how you might differentiate between performance and work quality. Failure to follow direction and other. Down here you have the opportunity to list the prior infractions. Why is this important? Because maybe you've lost that last warning, or maybe that last warning wasn't documented as thoroughly as it should have been. You've got an opportunity right here, again, to state the nature of the offense, write it down, and you are going to discuss what occurred this time, what the corrective action is, what the consequence is if they fail to meet the employer's standard, which is always, should always include possible disciplinary action up to and including termination. Every state and every examiner looks for that to be on the document, explaining that this person knew their job was in jeopardy. Another issue that can be a problem in dealing with employee separations and specifically unemployment matters is if you allow something to happen repeatedly to the degree that the employee says, yeah, I know I did it again. Yeah, I know it was wrong, but, you know, they didn't fire me. And they don't fire other people for that. I really just didn't think I was going to get fired for it. They don't even follow their own policy. It can be very damaging to the employer. So if you have a practice in place, a policy in place, it's important that you are carrying it out, or what may happen is when you do decide to carry it out, the state's not going to say you were reasonable because this person had no reason at that point to think that you were going to do anything different than what you had done in the past, which was not adhere to your policy. Here's a sample of the 2000, oh, I didn't know 18 was in here, I'm sorry. The 2018 employee attendance log. The 2019 is in AlphaSource. This is just what the form looks like. And you can obtain the form either in Excel format, which I prefer. It's a lot easier to work in, or you can get it in a PDF and simply document in PDF. And if you're not using it actually off a calendar, it may be that you're simply writing down notes which is good. I mean, as long as you're documenting, that's what's key. If you're documenting why an individual is separating or what the problem was on that day and what you stated to them, it's very important. But nothing works better than having it documented where the employee is communicating back to you, maybe through an email or text message, and that you're communicating the action. You know, some employers tend to say, oh, I don't want text. If there's a problem, do not text me, email, or do not text me, call. I agree that having that call, especially if it has to do with attendance matters and making sure you've got a replacement if you provide work in a business where having so many people ready, able to answer the phones or able to care for individuals is critical. But if the employee is communicating to you in text, that can become a very, very valuable document. They're texting their supervisor saying, I'm not coming to work today and this is why. And you've got the date, you've got the time, you've got it coming from the actual individual, and you have a supervisor that's responding, hopefully acknowledging that, maybe not acknowledging it to the degree from an HR perspective that needs to be done. They may do that once they reach the office and communicate with the employee, but that's valuable evidence. Please, if you decide to take disciplinary action against someone, collect that information. What frequently will happen is that you do a great job of having all of those text messages, and then we hear, oh, I'm so sorry, I changed my phone, and I can't get to them anymore. So it's as the HR representative for the company or manager, when you are about to take action, or if you're having a problem with someone, at some point, print them out, send them to your computer so that you have that information and can access it at any time, because once it's gone, and it can make the difference between winning or losing your case. This is the Notice of Employee Separation form, and this document, again, is available in AlphaSource. You can bring it up online, you can fill it out online, and then you can click send, and it'll send a copy to the payroll department as well as to the unemployment claims department. Now, one of the things that I do want to make sure that I mention is that it's important that you're documenting both. You need to go into the payroll system for the payroll record and communicate that this person separated, but you also need a paper trail. And you say, why do we need that? Because we need these signatures at the bottom. When a person separates from the company, we need to be able to share what occurred, and we can't take what's in the payroll system and pass it on as evidence. It's not signed, and unfortunately, we need something from you that shares why this person is leaving the company. But we're making it easier for you to complete, and what's most important is that you're documenting that the person separated and why. This is a copy of the center of the form that we were just looking at. We've talked a little bit about attendance. Generally, what I would like to say about the categories of misconduct where the employer is the moving party is that if someone is separating from the company and they are separating for a single occurrence, then what the state is looking for from the employer is that, one, the severity of that single occurrence warranted immediate dismissal. Two, that it is a situation that is defined in the employee handbook as being grounds for immediate dismissal, or may be broadly defined as fitting into one of your categories, or that it's something that involved a violation of the law. In short, if someone does something that justifies immediate dismissal, it should be something that the employer has identified in the handbook as being grounds for dismissal. Perhaps it has to do with workplace violence, immediate dismissal, and it's well documented. If it's a violation of a policy or rule, however, and the policy isn't documented in the handbook as being grounds for immediate dismissal, and the average individual wouldn't see that as something as being grounds for immediate dismissal, then your action may be viewed as too severe based on the infraction. So please keep those things in mind when the employer is the moving party. Again, talking about how it's all about the evidence. We are so much now a cell phone and photo society. Everybody's got a camera in their hand most of the time. Fortunately, as a result, we see more and more evidence to support the employer's position. It's surveillance video, or it's cell phone photos that were forwarded to the employer by subordinates who identified behavior of coworkers that they felt needed to be identified. Maybe it was because of quality issues in the nature of their business. A good example of that would be an individual who's sleeping on the job. Frequently, we see claims on individuals who are sleeping on the job where they're working 24 hours, working for employers that are open 24 hours a day. The individual coworker sees them sleeping, takes a picture, sends it to the supervisor, and the supervisor, based on their policy and practice of the severity of the action and the nature of the business, makes the decision to dismiss or issue a final warning. But having that picture makes all the difference. It's hard to argue with a picture where the person has tucked themselves up on a couch, pulled over a blanket, and is leaning on a pillow with their eyes closed. You can't say you're not sleeping. So when you can make and provide evidence, it really can change your case. Now, why do we talk so much about evidence? Sometimes employers get evidence, but the supervisor leaves the company. And so we're in a situation where we need to go to the witness. Maybe the supervisor conducted the disciplinary action. The employee refused to sign. The only other person that's still with the company is the witness. Key, when you have someone sitting in on an employee disciplinary action, and I just thought I would jump to this form for a second to point out what I was talking about. When you have someone sitting in as a witness in a disciplinary action, the purpose of being there is not just to be a witness, but to document what is stated and to consider yourself as a backup in support of the employer's position, so that if, unfortunately, something should occur where the supervisor or manager is no longer with the company, they may have found a new job or something else separated for another reason, it will fall on the witness. And we can still use this valuable document. But if it was not signed, or if the witness doesn't remember anything about the scenario because all they can say is, yeah, I witnessed it, then they're not in a position to present this. Some of the other reasons listed here: resignation with required notice, voluntary resignation without required notice. Again, simply identify through AlphaSource, and there are a few more codes in AlphaSource than there are actually on this form. Identify through AlphaSource what the reason for separation is, select the appropriate reason from the form, and then complete the document, and it automatically comes to us. Poor performance, we've talked a little bit about. We talked about the difference between poor performance and misconduct. We also talked about the fact that competency is simply not something that would deny someone benefits. If due to a lack of competency you make the decision to separate, they have done what they were supposed to do in trying to the best of their ability to meet your standard and are genuinely entitled, and will process those claims as quickly as possible. Let me talk quickly just about this one here, involuntary resignation. From the state's perspective, an involuntary resignation is still a discharge. It was, you can resign or you can be fired, but today's your last day. From the state's perspective, it's still a discharge. We classify it under the category of poor work performance because generally that may mean that the individual was separated for a reason that the employer has not identified as proven work-connected misconduct. Lastly, we have our lack of work categories, and then we have a few down here that would identify the separation under another possible reason. But again, providing us with evidence that supports why the person separated, to say, we identified that this person, we understand now that this person wasn't happy in their position. However, as the employer, we can't be expected to improve or discuss or consider taking action on something that's not been shared. And it became very clear that the individual had never shared that information with the employer and really assisted us in improving and strengthening our case. So here's one of the screens that you see in AlphaSource because I did want to bring these up. And if you were in AlphaSource, you have many different categories that you can go to. Under Documents, in the resource library, You can actually run a search. In this case, I ran the search under employee discipline, and look what it pulled up for me. It pulled up the attendance calendar, both the Excel and the PDF. It pulled up the employee disciplinary action form. It pulled up the employee handbook. There's a few old articles in here on employee relations, but I pulled up the notice of employee separation form. What you're able to do is simply select the document that you're interested in. So you can select the form you want. For example, let's say you want to complete the notice of employee separation form online. You would go down not to the resource library, but to the forms library. Select the notice of employee separation form. It comes up looking like this, where you're filling in the information exactly like we looked at on the form. And when you complete it, you get a nifty little email from the system. This one was Sarah did this one for me from our Anywhere USA demo. But this is what you would receive. A copy comes direct to AlphaStaff, one direct to the Unemployment Claims Department. A copy is sent to you, and it lets us know exactly why this person separated at the time of separation. This is the form, and I'm sure you know about it, again, in AlphaSource. If you're documenting why the individual left the company, I picked the one in this case. I was looking at job abandonment. So in the case of our employee, John Doe, was terminated 7/5/2019. I selected termination reason as abandoned job without notice, and I wrote, John was scheduled to work 7/1, 7/2, and 7/3, but did not call in to report his absence nor report to work. Last day worked was 6/28/19. In this case, I completed the document. I would have selected Save the Changes, and that would have documented it in the payroll system. So again, it's very important that you're doing both. The documentation, the notice of employee separation form, the acknowledgement of the employee handbook are documents that we use as resources, and then what you are communicating in the payroll system is also available to us too. The box that we completed here shows up in the notes system, which we are able to review. Very, very helpful. Again, what are some of our best practices? One, when you're working with employees, document immediately that performance or behavior that you're identifying as not acceptable. Set the standard and the consequence for failure to meet that standard. Use language that identifies the behavior, that describes what occurred, and not just your opinion. The state doesn't want to hear, she just isn't trying. The state wants you to explain how you made that decision. Or the state doesn't want to hear, she was rude. The state wants you to explain that when she was on the phone with the customer, she didn't greet the customer. She put the customer on hold without identifying that she would be placing the customer on hold. The customer was on hold for an extended period of time. When she returned, she simply transferred the customer without identifying that she would transfer the customer. Those are the things that they want to hear. Identify in detail exactly what occurred. Terminate weak performers who show little to no improvement as soon as possible. Again, from an unemployment perspective, you are increasing your liability with every day that they're there. And if once you make the decision that they are not going to meet your minimum standard of performance, it's better for them because they can find something that they're a better fit for, and it's better for you in reducing your liability and moving toward finding that right hire for you. In cases involving misconduct, remember that unemployment is final incident driven. You could have a great case of unexcused absenteeism due to the example I gave earlier, where the person simply doesn't get up in time, gets caught in traffic, even though they know it's going to be that way every single day, and yet they're terminated on an absence or instead of a tardy, and it's due to illness, and not related to something within their control. Make sure your case has continuity, and keep in mind that it's final incident driven. Make sure that your case, if you've had a first occurrence and then a written warning and then a final warning, that if you've made the decision to terminate, that unless the final incident justifies dismissal all by itself, that those prior disciplinary actions should be related to the reason that you've made the decision to terminate. Again, one that is sometimes missed that I haven't touched on and I would like to state, and that is allow employees that are resigning to work out their notice or pay them for the notice period. There are many states, too many to mention, that if the employer doesn't allow the employee to work out the notice period, you have converted that separation from a quit to a dismissal. And unless you have reason for changing this to a dismissal where it's an act of misconduct, you've dismissed the person because there's no longer work available, or because you don't want them to work for you anymore because they've resigned. And that's not going to be considered work-connected misconduct, and you've just bought yourself an unemployment claim. Very, very important. Also, how you handle that conversation with the person. It may want to be that you sit when they let you know that they've resigned. Maybe you've had some performance issues. They've resigned. To you, it's not such bad news that in 2 weeks their last day will be here. But what's important is if you've decided not to allow them to work out that 2-week period, that you meet with them and you let them know, thank you, that we've decided to go ahead and accept your resignation as of today. We are going to continue to pay you. It's not going to be necessary that you work through the entire notice period in the office, but it's possible that we might be calling you if we have questions. And so we'd like you to remain available. Again, we thank you so much for all you've done in providing us with notice. Nothing will be changing in terms of your pay. And if you have any questions about that, please get in touch with us. But during this notice period, it will not be necessary that you report in the office. And you remove the person from your workplace, and you have not changed the reason for separation on the claim. If you let the person go again without doing that and you do not pay them through the notice period, essentially you are probably going to be liable for the unemployment claim. Lastly, in your best practices, please provide us with timely, accurate, and adequate information. We can only respond with what you have advised the employee. And if your evidence was all based on information you found after the fact and it's never been shared with the employee, then it's likely that it's not going to be evidence that we can use in defending your case. And please, as much as possible, let your response back to us be as quickly as possible. The state, through sides, fortunately, does give us a greater window of time in responding because we're getting that claim usually on the day the individual actually files for unemployment. But the state will also call us and ask us for information and provide us with those 48-hour turnaround times. So we apologize in advance for the very, very short periods that we do allow or that we do have in this case, but we ask as much as possible that you provide us with that information, or we may unfortunately be in a situation where the state has not felt that we've provided adequate information in a timely manner, which can penalize us or actually cost us the unemployment claim. Other things to keep in mind: remember the length of time between your warnings. If the warning was 18 months ago and now you're having a warning for the same thing, depending on the severity of the infraction, the state may say, well, the warning did what it was supposed to. What's the warning supposed to do? Identify behavior that the employer hopes will change, and the person did make the change. So keep in mind the time between the two. Make sure your documentation is legible. Keep a copy. Make sure it's signed. Supporting evidence related to the warning, especially if they refuse to sign. The text messages, time and attendance, email, witness statements, all of those. As you know, If you've had an occurrence or an incident with an employee, ask them to write down their side of their story of what occurred, just like you're getting witness statements from the other individuals. Prior warnings related to the reason for termination is also a very important issue. Make sure they're related. It is the infraction based on a written policy. Again, we've talked about these. Okay, special provisions. In Florida, we've talked about the 90-day probationary period. Georgia doesn't, unfortunately, provide us with that. If you make the decision to let someone go and they've earned less than $3,300, then chances are you're not going to be liable for the unemployment. In Illinois, if they've worked for you 30 days or less, that's 30 working days or less, they don't have to be consecutive, then the employer is not liable. Maine, 5 or fewer consecutive weeks. Missouri, only 28 days. North Carolina, 100 days, and it's very similar to Florida. You have to have evidence. You have to have proof that the reason you let them go was due to genuine competency or lack of competency issues. And in Virginia, employed 30 working days or less, or for 240 hours or less. And the employer, under these provisions, is not liable for the unemployment benefits that might be paid out, which in some states can be very significant. For example, in Virginia and Illinois, the last employer picks up the tab on the unemployment claim. And in Illinois, as a matter of fact, it can be more than what you actually paid the individual in wages. So it's very, they may have worked for the last employer 3 years, came to work for you, you determined they weren't qualified, and you let them go on the 31st day. You've just bought yourself an unemployment claim that could cost you several $1,000s, easily $12,000, and the person may not have even earned that in wages. Illinois, unfortunately, works that way. Georgia, believe it or not, kind of works the same. Georgia, the amounts, unfortunately, are much less. Georgia says, okay, we'll cap, Mr. Employer, how much we charge you based on the total earnings you paid the individual. Don't worry, we won't charge you more than what you paid them. Not exactly a great consolation. So it's important, if you have a provision that provides you with protection, that you take advantage of it, or if you're in a state that does not provide you with any type of protection under the law, that you make those decisions to separate weak performers as quickly as you can. So how do we partner together? What's AlphaStaff's role? Well, the claims are coming to us through SIDE. We'll review what we already have on file, reach out to you for separation details. Please respond when we get those calls from the state asking for additional information as soon as you can, because they limit us to only 24 to 48 hours. We will file that official response with the state from your perspective. And while these calls related to fact-finding interviews can be aggravating for the employer, we appreciate that. On our side, we see it as an opportunity. It's time-consuming, but we have an opportunity before the examiner makes the decision to personally present your case before they make that decision. And Kayanne, who I know many of you know because she does an outstanding job in responding to claims as our first response, will literally present your case as much as she can in a way that helps that person see why the employer was justified in taking action. I can't tell you how many times we have calls where the examiner will say, I don't have time to look at the evidence you've sent to me, Kayanne. Just tell me what happened. Fine, we're glad to. We're only too glad to share from the employer's perspective, and they already have all that supporting documentation. We will file that timely response. We monitor your claims so that we don't end up paying for claims that we should. We will evaluate your case, and if we feel that the state has unfairly made that decision, we feel that it's one we should win, we'll represent you at your unemployment hearing, prepare your case, and be there with you in every state we're permitted by law. And in most states we can. Pennsylvania, as I think about it, is one of the states where they simply, unless we are there with you, will not allow us to represent you. South Carolina as well. You have to be a licensed practicing attorney in that state with a licensed in the state of South Carolina in order to represent an employer at an administrative unemployment hearing. Different states have different provisions, but we can prepare your case, we can prepare your witnesses, and do everything we possibly can. And then, as I said, where permitted, we will be there with you by telephone. Most of them, 95% of them, are conducted by telephone. What's your role? Continue to partner with AlphaStaff. One thing that's unique to AlphaStaff, I believe, is that having unemployment managed internally through that seamless PEO environment allows us internally to glean from your HR manager information that allows you to work with them, us to work with them, and put together a very clear picture, a complete picture of why the person's separated. In your case, you're utilizing your HR manager and best practices when a person is separating. They're looking at it from the big picture. Today, I shared what I know regarding employee separations related from an unemployment perspective. But as you know, there's so many other issues that we need to look at, and that's where your HR manager is invaluable. We work together in making sure that the big picture was considered. Timely respond to our inquiries, consider and follow the best practices that we've shared today, and provide AlphaStaff with detailed separation information and supporting evidence so that we can do our very best to win the claim together, because it's all about the evidence, but mostly it's about what happens on the job that you're doing on a day-to-day basis that will win or lose that case for us. Thank you so much for allowing us today to talk to you about unemployment benefits. It's been my true pleasure to do so. I am looking now to see if we have any messages or any questions, and I do not see any. At this time, I'm going to turn, again, thank you so much. This last page shares our information. Let me also say that you can communicate to KN and myself by utilizing the group phone number, the group fax, or the group email. It comes to both of us, and we partner together on almost every single case. So it's going through her desk and it's going through mine at the same time. Feel free to use the group email. We are never at all at any time offended or reach out to either one of us individually. Let me turn the meeting back over to Sandy.
Thank you, Pam. As usual, loaded with lots of information, and I appreciate her time very much, and Kay-Ann's as well. Thank you, everyone, again, for being here today. I do want to open it up for questions just in case somebody's been shy, and I'll give that just a moment. As, let's see, not seeing any questions. Please know, though, that we are available, as Pam had pointed out, whether you contact the team, her team directly, or you reach out to your HR account manager. If you did want a copy of the presentation, just give us a shout either through what I just mentioned or on your screen. You see the hrsc@alphastaff.com email address, as well as our direct number to AlphaStaff corporate office. And mark your calendars, especially if you're in California. Our next webinar is August 8th. It's also at 2 p.m. And our own Amy Brown, who has her credentials in California employment human resources practices, is very knowledgeable, and I'm sure if you've worked with her, you agree. So I oftentimes tell people, even if you're not in California, it's a great presentation that will enlighten you on many things that they do in California, but also things that maybe you should be doing because they're a little more stringent. But please make the time for that, and I don't see any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate your time.